Every morning here begins the same way. First, the smell. Coffee from 1,000 bars, scooter exhaust, hot stone already warm before the first tourist steps outside. Then, the sound, the roar of motorcycles, laughter in 20 languages. Somewhere, a bell. Somewhere, a car horn. Somewhere, a street musician playing O Sole Mio at a fountain 500 years old. 3 million people, 150 nationalities, 50 centuries of layers. Rome is unlike any other city. Other cities are built. Rome grew, slowly, painfully, through suffering and blood, through ash and plague, through betrayal and genius. It doesn't merely stand on the earth, it has grown into it. Its stones remember everything. But before it became eternal, it was nothing. 800 years before Christ. The Tiber here is wide and lazy. The banks, mud and reeds. The air smells of standing water, of rot, of smoke from distant fires. At night, the marshes scream with birds. Sometimes, wolves. 7 hills above the river, not mountains, just folds in the earth. But tall enough to see the enemy from far away, steep enough that the enemy could not climb quickly, close enough to water that you wouldn't die of thirst. People live here. They do not know they are building the capital of the world. They know only one thing. Here, you can survive. This city burned to the ground and rose again. Rivers of blood flowed through it, and it kept growing. It was buried under layers of ash, plague, and oblivion, and every time it pushed back through, like that flower in the crack of the Colosseum. Today we will bring its history back to life, from the very beginning, from the mud, the swamps, and a handful of people who had nothing but the will to stay alive. Welcome to Rome. Let us begin with the question everyone asks and almost no one answers honestly. Why here? Not at the river's mouth, where trade is easier. Not in the mountains, where defense is simpler. Not on the plain, where farming is better. Precisely here, 25 kilometers from the sea, in a valley that floods every spring, surrounded by malarial swamps where mosquitoes kill more reliably than any enemy. The answer is simple and brutal, like history itself. The Tiber Island, in the middle of the river, a small rock island splitting the current, the only place for hundreds of kilometers where the Tiber could be forded. Everyone moving north to south, merchants, soldiers, shepherds, refugees, passed through here. All trade routes from the north, from Etruscan lands, and from the south, from Greek colonies, crossed at this single point. Whoever controlled this crossing controlled everything. That is why people came here. Not for love of beauty, from cold calculation, from the instinct for gain and survival, which are the same thing when you have nothing to eat. The first settlers on Rome's hills appeared around the 10th century BC. They were Latins, short, dark-skinned people speaking the language that would become the foundation of half the world's languages. They herded cattle, grew emmer wheat, hunted in the oak groves. They were not great. They were not chosen. They simply arrived first. By night, watching the fires of their neighbors, the Sabines on the Quirinal, the shepherds in the marshes below, they must have thought about how to keep strangers off their hill, and also about how to make a deal with them, because no single tribe can survive alone. Legend says Rome was founded by Romulus in 753 BC. He drew a furrow with a plow around the Palatine Hill, and everything inside became a city, a sacred boundary, the Pomerium. A beautiful story. Reality is rougher. Reality is layers. Archaeologists keep finding them, layer after layer, huts replaced by huts, one culture burying another like sediment. Rome was not founded in a single day by a single man. It grew slowly, like an abscess. Several hilltop villages gradually began to coordinate their defense, then their trade, then their governance. But the legend was as necessary to them as it is to us. Every great city needs a myth of its birth. Romulus and Remus, sons of the war god Mars and the Vestal Virgin Rhea Silvia, thrown into the river, suckled by a she-wolf at the foot of the Palatine, fed on the wild milk of war from their first days of life. This story tells you everything about the city. Rome is a child of violence and survival, born to die and surviving against all odds, nursed by a predator, with the blood of war in its veins. And the first thing the city's founder did was kill his own brother. Because he dared to cross the boundary, Rome began with the blood of a kinsman. And this theme will repeat again and again through all its history, like a curse, like DNA. The Etruscans, northern neighbors standing several rungs higher on the ladder of civilization. While Latins lived in huts, Etruscans built in stone. While Latins drew boundaries with plows, Etruscans laid drainage systems and paved streets. While Latins made crude sacrifices to their gods, Etruscans created elaborate rituals, read omens in the flight of birds, predicted fate in the shapes of clouds. Around 616 BC, the first Etruscan king ascended Rome's throne, Tarquinius Priscus, a stranger, an outsider, a man who spoke a different language and worshipped different gods. And it was he who turned a village into a city. Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, Rome's main drainage canal, one of the greatest engineering projects of the ancient world. The Etruscans drained the marshes between the hills, that same spot where the Colosseum stands, where the Forum lies, where in the future the heart of an empire would beat. They channeled the water to the Tiber through a giant stone tunnel, 3 human heights in diameter. Imagine, a bog where no foot dries out becomes solid ground. Where water stood, a square appears. On the square, a temple. By the temple, a market. By the market, a crowd. From swamp, a city. The Cloaca Maxima still functions today. Right now, beneath the feet of millions of tourists, Etruscan stone laid 2,600 years ago still holds its vaults. Some things are built to last forever. Under the Etruscan kings, Rome built at breathtaking speed. They drained the marshes, and the Forum appeared. The Forum is not simply a square, it is a heart. The place where people trade and litigate, pray and kill, declare war and make peace. All the life of the city flowed through the Forum, the way blood flows through a heart. They built the first wooden bridge across the Tiber, Pons Sublicius, a bridge on wooden pilings without a single nail, only wood, stone, and the will to hold the crossing. Armies will march across it, refugees will flee across it, conquerors will enter Rome over it, and triumphal generals will leave. The Circus Maximus appeared, at first simply a trampled valley between hills where they held chariot races, then wooden stands, then stone. Then 250,000 people would roar in a single surge, and the sound would carry 20 kilometers. The Etruscans brought the alphabet, the one that became Latin, brought ritual law, epos, sacred law, brought the technology of the arch, which would let the Romans build everything they would ever build, teachers, the first masters. People history has nearly forgotten because their students turned out too good. Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, the last king of Rome. He ruled through fear. He had senators executed without trial. He humiliated the nobility. His son raped Lucretia, a noblewoman, the wife of one of the leading citizens. Lucretia told her father and her husband and killed herself. That was enough. Rome revolted. Tarquin fled. And in 509 BC, in place of kingly power, something new arose, something unheard of, something that had not existed anywhere in the world in quite this form. The Republic, res publica, the common thing, the thing of all. From now on, Rome would be governed by 2 consuls, elected each year, 2 men with equal power, each able to block the other's decisions. A system of checks invented not from love of justice, but from fear of a tyrant. The Senate. 300 founding fathers. Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome. SPQR, 4 letters under which continents would be conquered. But before conquering the world, Rome had to learn to survive. The young republic was surrounded by enemies. On all sides, tribes ready to wipe this upstart city from the face of the earth. Etruscans offended by their king's expulsion. Latin cities, envious of Rome's growing strength. Mountain Samnites, fierce warriors for whom war was a way of life. And Rome began to fight, not out of aggression. At first, out of fear, out of necessity. Each war led to the next. Defeating neighbors, Rome found itself neighboring new enemies. The border of victory was simultaneously the border of a new threat. That is how expansion works. It does not stop. Over 2.5 centuries, the Republic subdued all of Italy. Not merely conquered, it integrated. The defeated were offered not slavery, but partnership, Latin rights, alliance, Roman citizenship, the most valuable political status in the world. Rome's genius was not the force of the sword. Rome's genius was that it knew how to turn enemies into Romans. Carthage, a Phoenician city on the northern coast of Africa, a trading empire that controlled the western Mediterranean, the wealthiest city in the world, and a direct competitor to Rome for dominion over the sea. 3 Punic Wars, 120 years of mutual destruction. The First War. Rome learns to fight at sea. They have no fleet. They capture 1 Carthaginian warship, dismantle it to the last plank, study the design, and build 120 exact copies in 60 days. 60 days, 120 ships. That is Rome. The Second War brought Hannibal, the greatest military commander of antiquity. He led an army with war elephants through the Alps in winter, through passes where not just an elephant, a man could barely pass. He lost half his men and most of the elephants. The ones that survived descended into Italy. At Cannae in 216 BC, Hannibal destroyed 80,000 Roman soldiers in a single day. Eyes. 80,000. That was not a defeat. That was annihilation. The Senate convened the next day, not to discuss surrender, to decide how to continue the war. Rome did not surrender, never. The Third Punic War ended with Rome wiping Carthage from the face of the earth, literally. For 17 days straight, the city burned. Then Roman soldiers went through it and destroyed every stone. According to legend, they salted the earth so nothing would grow. Whether that is true or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is something else. The Senator Cato the Elder ended every speech he ever gave, on any topic whatsoever, with the same words. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. It was destroyed, and now the sea belonged to Rome. Victory changed Rome. Wealth poured into the city like a river. Plunder, slaves, tribute from the provinces. The old land-owning aristocracy grew fabulously rich. Small farmers were ruined. Their fields were bought up by the wealthy, worked by slaves captured in wars. Rome was getting richer and more dangerous to itself. The Gracchi brothers tried to pass land reform. They were murdered, right in Rome, right beside the temples. Then Marius and Sulla commanders, quarreling for power, brought legions into the city itself. Rome was at war with itself, and then he appeared. Gaius Julius Caesar, an aristocrat playing at democracy, a general pretending to be a politician, a man who understood what others did not. The Republic was dead. It simply did not know it yet. 10 years in Gaul, 800 towns, 300 tribes, 1 million dead, another million into slavery. Numbers that should take your breath away. Caesar returned victorious, with an army personally loyal to him, with the riches of Gaul, with a reputation that eclipsed everything. To cross the Rubicon with an army meant declaring war on the Senate, violating sacred law, starting a civil war. Caesar stood at the river, thought, then stepped forward. Alea iacta est, the die is cast. Pompey fled, the Senate capitulated. Caesar became dictator. He was a brilliant ruler. He passed reforms the country had awaited for 100 years. He reorganized the calendar, that same Julian calendar that Europe used for another 1,500 years. But he made one mistake. He allowed himself to think he was invulnerable. 23 stab wounds in the Senate from men he considered friends. Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus? The assassins thought they were saving the Republic. Hay killed it. Because after Caesar's death began a new civil war, more brutal than all the previous ones. And when the dust settled, there stood a young man with a quiet voice and a will of iron. Gaius Octavius, Caesar's adopted son, the future Augustus. He was cleverer than Caesar. He did not call himself king, did not call himself dictator. He called himself princeps, first among equals. He preserved all the institutions of the Republic, the Senate, the consuls, the elections. He simply quietly placed himself above all of them. In 27 BC, the Senate solemnly granted him the title Augustus, the exalted, the sacred. The Republic became the empire. No one noticed the moment it happened. I found a city of brick and leave it one of marble, Augustus said. And it was true. Under him, Rome was transformed. The new Forum of Augustus, the altar of peace, Ara Pacis, the Forum of Julius Caesar, aqueducts, temples, roads extending hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The famous saying, "All roads lead to Rome," was born here, because it was literally true. From the golden milestone in the Forum, the Miliarium Aureum, the distance to every point in the empire was measured. 20 million people under one authority. The Mediterranean had become the empire's inland lake. Mare Nostrum, our sea, 1,000 gods in one temple, the Pantheon, what Hadrian built in the early 2nd century, still stands in Rome today, untouched. A dome that would not be surpassed until the Renaissance. The Colosseum, an amphitheater for 50,000 spectators, built in 10 years, 80 entrance arches. Beneath the floor, a complex system of lifts and trap doors through which wild animals were raised to the arena. On game days, Rome smelled of blood, and that was the smell of happiness for those who sat in the stands. But Rome was not only marble. Marble was for those who could see it. 1 million people in this city, the majority lived in insulae. Multi-story tenements of fired brick, where the upper floors, the cheapest and most dangerous, had no water, no heating, no proper exit. Fires broke out every night. The streets smelled of urine, because the public latrines cost a coin, and not everyone had one. Of rotting garbage, because refuse was thrown directly from windows onto the heads of passers-by. At night, going out alone was dangerous. Between the luxury of the Forum and the filth of the alleys, 200 paces. That was Rome too. But no flowering lasts forever. Problems had been accumulating for centuries. An empire too large, and its borders stretched too thin. Too many armies on the periphery, too little money in the treasury. Inflation, corruption, civil wars, one after another, soldier emperors murdered before they could build anything. 410 AD. For the first time in 800 years, an enemy seizes Rome. Alaric, a Visigoth. A man to whom Rome had once given citizenship, paid a salary, called an ally. 3 days they plundered the city. 3 days. The news rolled across the entire world. Saint Jerome, one of the church fathers, wrote in his cell in Bethlehem, "My voice is choked with sobs. The city has been seized that once seized the whole world." Rome had fallen, but it had not died. 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, as though history were mocking itself, was deposed, the purple cloak removed. The West had died, but Rome had not. Because while Germanic kings divided the provinces, while Constantinople inherited the eastern half of the empire, in the city of Rome itself, there remained something that yields to no sword: the Pope. Rome died as the capital of an empire, and immediately began to be born as the capital of another, a spiritual one. That is Rome. It always finds something to live for. 6th to 13th centuries. Imagine New York without people. The skyscrapers still stand. The bridges are intact. The roads undamaged. But no water, no electricity. The stores are empty. And instead of 8 million people, 20,000. They live in the basements of shopping malls, in the lobbies of skyscrapers, in Central Park, between trees that have grown right through the asphalt. That is what happened to Rome. Over 200 years, from the 5th to the 7th century, Rome lost 95% of its population. 95. That is not a decline. That is collapse. That is what happens to cities after a nuclear bomb, only slower and therefore more terrible. Because each generation has the chance to understand that things are worse than they were for their parents, and that for their children, things will be worse still. People lived inside the Colosseum, literally inside it, in the arches where equipment had once been stored, in the galleries where spectators once pressed with trays of roasted meat. They lit hearths in places that smelled of blood millennia old. They strung laundry between the columns. The Colosseum, symbol of greatness, had become a slum. But a slum is life, and outside was death. 537 AD, one decision, one order. Witiges, king of the Ostrogoths besieging Rome, understood what no one before him had grasped. Rome's true strength was not its walls. Rome's true strength was its water. 11 aqueducts, 11 arteries that carried more than 1 million cubic meters of water into the city every single day. From mountain springs dozens of kilometers away, through bridges, tunnels, stone pipes, directly into the fountains, the baths, the homes. The Ostrogoths destroyed them in a matter of days. The water stopped. The thermae, enormous, magnificent, capable of accommodating thousands, emptied and began to rot. The mills on the river stopped. The fountains went silent. And then the marshes returned. Malaria. Malaria, bad air. That is what people called it, not understanding that the killers were not the miasmas, but mosquitoes in standing water. Every summer it came from the marshes. Every summer it cut down the weakened. Children first, the elderly next. Rome was built by draining the swamps. Rome died when the swamps returned. 20 years. From 535 to 554, Italy was a battlefield between the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, which wanted to reclaim the West, and the Ostrogothic kingdom, which refused to give it up. Rome changed hands 5 times. 5 times it was seized, 5 times liberated, each time a siege, famine, massacre, or capitulation. Each time, fresh corpses on ancient streets. In 546, Totila took a Rome in which almost no one remained. The Byzantine historian Procopius of Caesarea, a contemporary of these events, wrote, "Rome was completely empty of people. Empty, the greatest city in the world, the mother of cities, the eternal, as they called it. Empty." Totila wanted to tear it to the ground. His advisors stopped him. Even barbarians understood. To destroy Rome is to kill time itself. While armies fought, the city slowly devoured itself. Marble, there was too much of it, and it was too valuable to simply stand there. Ancient statues, the facing of the forums, the slabs of temples, all of it was crushed and burned in special kilns. Calcarea, lime pits. Marble at high temperature becomes lime, needed for mortar. From the bodies of Rome, a new, smaller Rome was being shaped. Of the thousands of ancient buildings, a negligible handful would survive, not because they were preserved, but because they became churches. That was the only way to escape being plundered. If services were held in a building, it would not be touched. If God was there, better not to risk it. The Pantheon survived because in 608 AD, it was consecrated as the Church of Santa Maria ad Martires. God saved what people could not. Rome shrank, literally. The entire medieval city fit in the bend of the Tiber. The disabitato, uninhabited zone, as all the rest of the former Rome was called, occupied 3/4 of the territory. Where Trajan had built his forums, cattle grazed. Where the baths of Caracalla stood, peasants dug vegetable gardens, striking marble heads of gods with their spades. The noble families built towers, not out of vanity, out of necessity. Without central authority, Rome had become a city of clans. Colonna, Orsini, Frangipani. Each clan controlled its own neighborhood, its own street, its own gates. Towers were castles within the urban fabric, observation posts and fortresses at once. At one point, more than 100 such towers stood in Rome. The city resembled a medieval Manhattan, only instead of glass and steel, brick and hatred. 590 AD, the plague came to Rome again. The third Justinianic pandemic reached a city already exhausted by wars and famine. Citizens were dying so fast, there was no one left to bury them. Corpses lay in the streets. The Tiber carried bloated bodies. In this moment, Gregory became Bishop of Rome. He organized burials. He organized the feeding of the poor from church granaries. He negotiated with the Lombards threatening the city because there was no one else to do it. The imperial exarch in Ravenna did not respond. Constantinople was silent. Gregory did what a secular ruler should have done, and he understood. He was the ruler, because there was no one else. Legend says, when the procession reached the mausoleum of Hadrian, Gregory saw above it the archangel Michael with a blood-stained sword. The angel sheathed the sword. The plague began to recede. Whether that is true or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is that from then on, Hadrian's mausoleum has been called Castel Sant'Angelo, the castle of the holy angel, and that in the minds of the citizens, it was the Pope who saved them, not the emperor, not the army, the Pope. Rome found itself under siege, but not a military one, an ideological one. From the south, Islam. Arab armies left Arabia in 632 and swept to France within 100 years. Christian North Africa, Christian for 1,000 years, fell in 20. Egypt, Syria, Palestine, all slipping away. From the north, pagans, Franks, Saxons, Scandinavian peoples who worshipped Odin and Thor. On Christmas Day 800, Pope Leo III did something audacious. He took a crown and placed it on the head of Charlemagne, king of the Franks. With this gesture, he declared something revolutionary. The power of kings comes from God, and God speaks through the Pope. Therefore, it is the Pope who decides who is worthy to wear the crown. One gesture, 3 words, and the world changed. For 7 centuries thereafter, popes and kings would fight over this principle. Who is higher? Who submits to whom? Whose power is primary? Rome again became the center of the world, not military, spiritual, which, as it turned out, is even more dangerous. 846 AD, the Arabs came from the sea. Saracens landed at the Tiber's mouth, marched to Rome, and plundered St. Peter's Basilica, the holiest shrine of the Christian world, the very tomb of the Apostle Peter. They did not enter the city itself. The Aurelian walls held. But what they did outside was enough. Pope Leo IV understood the lesson immediately. Over 4 years, from 848 to 852, a new wall rose around the Vatican Hill and St. Peter's Basilica. The Wall of Leo, Mura Leonine, a new fortified quarter, a separate city within a city. Borgo, they would call it, literally settlement. The Pope had built himself a fortress, and that tells you more about papal power than any theology. Pilgrims from England, Germany, France, Spain. Thousands of people every year traveled hundreds of kilometers to touch the relics of the apostles, to die on the road and never arrive, to contract malaria and die here at the walls of the Dream City. Rome had become the Mecca of the Christian world, and where pilgrims go, gold follows, donations, relics, trade, inns for weary travelers, bakeries for the hungry, money changers for those who arrived with German coins and wanted Roman ones. Piety and profit were never separated by a high wall. In Rome, there was no wall at all. 1095. Pope Urban II delivered a speech that changed the world. He called on Christians to take up arms and retake Jerusalem from the Seljuks. He promised all who died on this campaign would go straight to paradise. Remission of sins, immediate, total. Deus vult! God wills it! The cry rang across all of Europe. Rome did not send an army. Rome gave legitimacy. The Pope blessed, and thousands died with his name on their lips. The Pope declared war, and kings led soldiers. The Pope excommunicated, and monarchs lost their thrones. This was a power Caesar never had. Caesar could kill the body. The Pope could kill the soul. By the end of the 13th century, Rome counted some 30,000 people. 30,000, against 1 million at the height of empire. But those 30,000 lived in a city where every stone remembered greatness, where a pasture had once been a forum, where a vegetable garden grew, where the temple of Jupiter had stood, where the foundation of every house held marble with inscriptions no one could read anymore. Rome was a city living among its own skeleton. The past was being used as fertilizer, but it had not died. It was waiting. 14th to 16th centuries, Rome was left without a pope. In 1309, Pope Clement V, French by birth, a puppet of the French king Philip IV, transferred the papal residence to Avignon. 7 popes in a row, 70 years. For 70 years, Rome was the spiritual capital of the world, but without its spiritual ruler. Like a body without a head, like a city without purpose, without a pope, without pilgrims, without money, without order. The clans returned to the old ways. The Colonna and Orsini again fought over streets, blocked bridges, set fire to their enemies' quarters. Rome resembled a diseased organ from which the blood had been extracted, and then he appeared. Cola di Rienzo. Cola di Rienzo was a madman, or a genius, or, which is not uncommon, both at once. A tavern keeper's son, self-taught, drunk on ancient authors, a man who believed, truly believed, that Rome could be returned to republican greatness, not metaphorically, literally. In May 1347, he climbed the Capitol line and declared the restoration of the Roman Republic. The crowd supported him. The clans fled. For 7 months, he ruled as tribuno, a reborn people's tribune of antiquity. Then they deposed him. Then he returned. Then they killed him, right on the steps of the Capitol. The crowd he had created tore him apart. But the idea remained. Rome remembered itself. Rome wanted to remember itself. And a few decades later, a man would come who would help it remember. not through revolution, through beauty. 1377. The Pope returned. Gregory XI, the last French pope, rode into Rome to the ringing of bells. People wept, it is said. Some fell to their knees right in the mud of the streets. Rome was Rome again, and immediately began to build. The popes of the Renaissance understood something important. Beauty is power. If Rome is more beautiful than any city in the world, people will come. If they come, they pay. If they pay, the Pope is rich. If the Pope is rich, he is powerful. Simple logic, grandiose execution. 1453, Constantinople fell. The last fragment of the Eastern Roman Empire. Thousands of scholars, artists, and philosophers fled west. They carried manuscripts, Plato, Aristotle, Ptolemy, knowledge the West had believed lost. It came to Rome, and Rome flowered, as earth flowers after a long winter, quickly, violently, overwhelmingly. But first, about the monsters. Because the Renaissance was not only about beauty, the Borgias, a Spanish clan that climbed to the papal throne. Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, the very same year Columbus discovered America. A coincidence worthy of a novel. He bought the papal throne, literally. He distributed bags of gold to cardinals in exchange for their votes. He had children, strictly forbidden to a pope. His son Cesare disposed of political rivals with the knife and poison. His daughter Lucrezia was married 3 times, and each time the previous husband died under mysterious circumstances. Cantarella, that was the name given to Borgia poison. Presumably arsenic mixed with other substances, it acted slowly. The victim could live for weeks thinking he was simply ill. Rome under the Borgias was a city where death might lurk behind every cup, where alliances were struck in the morning and broken by evening, where a cardinal might be poisoned at lunch and his palace looted before dinner. And all of this a few hundred steps from the altars where Mass was being said. But in that same city, at that same moment, a few city blocks from the Vatican banquets with poison, something else was happening. Michelangelo Buonarroti lay on his back beneath the vaults of the Sistine Chapel. 4 years, 1508 to 1512. It was torture. Pope Julius II demanded speed. Michelangelo demanded time. They hated each other, and together created the greatest work of art in history. The artist ate standing up. He didn't remove his boots for weeks. Then skin peeled off with the leather. Paint dripped into his eyes and burned them. He learned to read holding a book above his head because his neck could no longer fully straighten. When the chapel opened, people entered and froze. They simply froze, could not move. Some wept. One ceiling, one man, 4 years of agony, and immortality. Beside Michelangelo, Raphael. If Michelangelo was a thunderstorm, Raphael was a sunny day. Where Michelangelo suffered, Raphael created with ease, with joy, with that maddening lightness that no genius can explain and no one can imitate. He died at 37. On his own birthday, of fever, or from too riotous a life, as malicious tongues said. He was buried in the Pantheon, where emperors had prayed to gods. An artist was placed beside the gods, and no one found this strange. By the 1520s, Rome was the most beautiful city in Europe, and the richest, and the most arrogant. The popes competed in the lavishness of their patronage. Cardinals built palaces that put royal residences to shame. Courtesans quoted Virgil and debated Neoplatonism. Artists, sculptors, architects streamed in from all of Italy because the pay was here. But in Germany, thunder was already rumbling. Martin Luther nailed his theses to a door. He called Rome the whore of Babylon. He said that indulgences, which the Pope was selling to finance the building of St. Peter's, were blasphemy. He was right, and Europe heard him. The Christian world had split, and at this moment, at the moment of maximum papal vulnerability, when his spiritual authority was cracking, an army moved from the north. The army numbered roughly 34,000 men. It had not been paid for months. It had no provisions. It fed itself by plundering the road. The commander, the Constable of Bourbon, tried to restrain it from the worst, and was killed by the very first shot, fired at the city walls. After that, there was no one left who could stop what began. May 6, 1527, Sacco di Roma, the sack of Rome. The Swiss Guard, 189 men, against several thousand enraged mercenaries. Their task was one, to give Pope Clement the seventh time to escape along the Passetto di Borgo, a secret corridor in the wall connecting the Vatican to Castel Sant'Angelo. This corridor was built by Pope Nicholas III 250 years earlier precisely for such occasions. The guardsmen held their position. The guardsmen fall one by one. They do not retreat. They stand, until the last of them falls. 147 guardsmen died on the steps of the basilica. 42 survivors escorted the Pope along the corridor to Castel Sant'Angelo and barred the gates. Clement VII looked down from the castle walls at what was happening below and could do nothing. What happened next went on for 9 months. 9 months. The mercenaries seized the city, and no one could drive them out. They divided Rome like spoils. Every street, every house, every church belonged to whoever got there first. Priests were tortured for gold. They were dressed in papal vestments and driven through the streets to laughter and jeers in a mocking parody of a triumph. Nuns were violated right inside their convents. Relics, the bones of saints, the crown of thorns, fragments of the true cross, were thrown into the streets or sold for nothing in taverns. The Tiber carried corpses, so many that no one bothered to bury them. They were simply thrown in the river, and the current carried them to the sea. One eyewitness wrote, "Rome, which once ruled the whole world, now weeps in chains." On Raphael's frescoes in the Vatican stanza, the landsknechts carved their names right into the paintings. Some of those inscriptions are still visible today. The names of the victors on the cheek of beauty. Pope Clement VII spent 7 months inside Castel Sant'Angelo. He listened as his city was plundered. He watched the smoke rise over the neighborhoods. He received reports about what was happening below. In September 1527, he finally paid the ransom, an enormous one, and signed all the conditions they dictated to him. He was released. By then, Rome was a shadow of itself again. The population had fallen from 55,000 to 30. Artists had fled. Humanists had fled. Craftsmen had fled. Merchants had fled. The brilliant age, gold, genius, madness, had ended in filth and blood. But the ceiling had survived. The landsknechts never reached the Sistine Chapel. Either they didn't find their way there, or they didn't think of it. Or there was still enough human in them not to touch this. Michelangelo looked down at them from on high, and they lowered their eyes. Rome did not die. It never dies. It simply records the moment, lays down another layer of ash, blood, marble over the last one, and continues. Because the city is not walls, not palaces, not frescoes. The city is the people who return to their hearths the day after the catastrophe and light the fire again. 17th to 18th centuries. After the sack of 1527, the Church drew its conclusions. Not the conclusions Luther had hoped for. Not repentance, not reform, not humility. It bet on beauty. The Council of Trent lasted 18 years. 18 years of theological argument, political horse trading, mutual accusations, and compromises. And in the end, a decision that would change Rome's face forever. Luther says icons are idolatry, that relics are superstition, that lavish ceremony distracts from God? Very well. Then we will respond in a way that leaves no further room for the question. The Counter-Reformation chose art as its weapon. If the Protestant Church offers white walls and emptiness so that nothing distracts from the Word of God, then the Catholic Church will shout. It will overwhelm the worshiper from every direction with gold, marble, frescoes, sculpture, light, shadow, the smell of incense. Entering such a church, a person was meant to feel crushed, not by people, but by God. This was not deception. This was strategy. Giovanni Lorenzo Bernini, a genius, the favorite of popes, the man who rewrote Rome. He was born in 1598 and died in 1680. In those 82 years, he created more than most entire epochs. Pope Urban VIII, one of the most intelligent men of his time, said of him, "This man was born for Rome, and Rome was born for him." At 8, he was molding horses from clay, and the old masters demanded to see the boy who could do this. At 21, he created Apollo and Daphne, marble transformed into skin, into leaves, into motion, marble that breathes. They asked him, "How do you achieve this?" He said, "I do not carve from marble. I remove everything superfluous. The figure is already inside. It was always there. St. Peter's Square." Bernini created it over 15 years, 400 columns, 88 pilasters, 140 statues of saints along the perimeter, and all of it in the form of an ellipse, which embraces the space the way a mother's arms embrace a child. He explained the concept himself. The church stretches out its arms to receive the faithful and strengthen them in their faith, to attract the strayed, to enlighten the unbeliever. The baldachin, 29 meters, bronze stripped from the Pantheon, all that was still there. Pope Urban VIII gave the order. The Romans made up a saying about it: "Quod non fecerunt barbari, fecerunt barbarini." What the barbarians did not do, the Barberini did. A bitter joke, but they laughed, because the result was beautiful. Francesco Borromini. If Bernini was the sun, Borromini was the dark. If Bernini reveled in life, in women, in papal favor, Borromini lived in asceticism, in bitterness, in solitude. They worked side by side, sometimes literally on the same building, and hated each other with a methodical thoroughness worthy of gods. San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane, in area, smaller than one of the columns of Bernini's baldachin, in power, equal to a cathedral. Architects study it to this day, and still cannot fully understand how it works. In 1667, Borromini took a sword and threw himself upon it. The first attempt failed. He survived a few more hours. In those last hours, it is said, he dictated a detailed account to his servants of exactly how it had happened, methodically, like an architectural drawing. He was faithful to his dark precision to the end. He was buried without honors, a suicide. The church did not forgive this. But his buildings stand, and in them, more pain and genius than in many a cathedral. Baroque Rome was theater. That is not a metaphor. Piazza Navona, the former stadium of Domitian, had become the city's main stage. Carnivals were held here, in which all Rome took part. On feast days, the square was flooded, the drains were blocked, and the nobility rode through the shallow water in carriages. This was called Il Lago di Piazza Navona, the Lake of Piazza Navona. Carnival, and behind the mask, a denunciation, because behind the lavish Baroque stage, another machine was at work, the Inquisition, Campo dei Fiori, the Field of Flowers, a beautiful name for a place where people were burned. On February 17, 1600, Giordano Bruno was burned here, a Dominican friar, a philosopher, A man who had dared to think further than his age permitted. He said, "The universe is infinite. The stars are suns around which other worlds revolve. The earth is not at the center of creation. And God is not what the theologians describe. For 7 years he was kept in captivity. For 7 years they tried to make him recant. He did not recant. It is said that when his sentence was read out, he told the inquisitors, 'Perhaps you pronounce this sentence upon me with greater fear than I hear it.' The fire was lit. The square watched. Today a statue stands on that spot, a market, flowers, the laughter of tourists. History is like that. First it burns, then it erects a monument, 1633. Galileo Galilei, the greatest scientist of his time, knelt in a hall of the Roman Inquisition. He had confirmed what had long been known. The earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. He had seen it through a telescope. He had proved it mathematically. It was the truth, as solid as the stone on which he knelt. They made him recant. And, legend says, barely audibly under his breath, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. Whether he actually said it is unknown, but the earth moved, regardless of what the court decided. Truth cannot be burned. It can be silenced for a time, for a generation, for two. Then it returns. The Trevi Fountain, the final punctuation mark of Baroque Rome, built in 1762, almost a century after Bernini's death, but in the same tradition, bigger, louder, more overwhelming. The terminus of the ancient Aqua Virgo aqueduct, the one that survived all the destruction. Water that Agrippa brought to Rome in 19 BC was still flowing. Now it emerged from the mouth of a Baroque Neptune. Legend says, "Throw a coin and you will return to Rome." Every year, more than €1 million are retrieved from the Trevi Fountain. The money goes to charitable causes. Even the desire to return to Rome benefits someone. That is also Rome. By the 18th century, Rome had become a museum, a great one, unsurpassed, but a museum. English aristocrats on the Grand Tour came to look at ruins. German philosophers wrote treatises on the decline of civilizations while gazing at the Forum. French painters painted the Colosseum in moonlight. Rome inspired everyone and controlled no one. To the west, something was already igniting, something that would shake the world more powerfully than any barbarian army. An idea. 19th century. The revolution came from Paris, but it reached Rome. Napoleon Bonaparte crossed the Alps in 1796 at the head of a French army and rewrote the map of Italy in a matter of months, not as a conqueror, as a surgeon. He cut, reshuffled, removed some states and created others. In 1798, French troops entered Rome. They proclaimed a Roman Republic and took the art. Systematically, methodically, with inventories, like a house move, not a sack. Paintings, sculptures, manuscripts were loaded onto wagons and taken to Paris. Much of it is still there. The Pope was arrested. Pius VI was 80 years old. He was placed in a carriage and taken north, through the Alps to France, into captivity. Think about that. The Pope of Rome, the vicar of Christ on earth, the head of a church to which kings had submitted for half a millennium, arrested. Like an ordinary political prisoner, like a man who could simply be taken away. He died in captivity in Valence in 1799. Napoleon, hearing the news, shrugged and said something to the effect of, "Well, an old man has died." An old man died. A 1,000-year-old system had been shaken. Napoleon invited the new pope to Paris for the coronation. The pope accepted. He had no choice. And when the moment came, Napoleon took the crown from the hands of the pontiff and placed it on his own head, without intermediaries, directly. A gesture that destroyed 7 centuries of the pope's symbolic power over kings. Pope Pius VII sat in the front row, watched, was silent. But while Napoleon was humiliating the Pope, he was doing something else. He was spreading ideas, freedom, equality, nation. Words that had been philosophical abstractions suddenly became political demands. Young Italians reading French proclamations asked themselves, why are we fragmented? Why is Italy a dozen little states under the rule of Austrians, Spaniards, and the Pope? Why is there no united Italy? Il Risorgimento, the resurgence. Not cultural this time, political. They wanted Italy, united, their own. After Napoleon's fall, the monarchs put everything back in place. The Pope, back in the Vatican, Austria, back in northern Italy, the Bourbons, back in the south. But an idea cannot be put back in its place. In 1848, all of Europe exploded. Revolutions in Paris, Vienna, Berlin, Prague, Budapest, everywhere. Crowds demanding constitutions and freedoms, and in Rome, too. Pope Pius IX fled the city. In women's clothing, one version says, more precisely, disguised as a plain priest, under cover of night, in secret. The Pope fled from Rome for the second time in half a century, and again, at this moment, Rome proclaimed a republic, Garibaldi. One word, one man, one red shirt. He had fought for republics in South America when he was expelled from Italy. He had seen how men fight when they have nothing to lose. He understood. A nation is not born from treaties, but from blood. Rome held for a month, then another, and another. On the Janiculum Hill, the Gianicolo, the hardest fighting took place. French professional soldiers against volunteers, students, workers, artists, adventurers, men without military training, but with a furious readiness to die. Beside Garibaldi, his wife, Anita, pregnant, armed. She died during the retreat. Fever. Garibaldi carried her body through the marshes, trying to save her. He could not. History is cruel to those who believe in it. Garibaldi spoke his last words to those who remained. I offer hunger, cold, exhausting marches. Those who love the fatherland, follow me. Some followed, many stayed. The Republic fell. The Pope returned under the protection of French bayonets. Garibaldi went into exile again, to New York this time, to make candles in a factory. His dream seemed dead, but like everything in this city, it was simply waiting. In 10 years, Italy unified, almost entirely. One piece was missing, the hardest, the most painful, Rome. Rome was protected by Napoleon III. The French garrison stood here, and as long as it stood, the Italian army could not enter. And then the Franco-Prussian War broke out. September 1870. The French were gone. Napoleon III lost to the Prussians at Sedan and was taken prisoner. His empire collapsed, and with it, the Pope's last protection. The Italian army under General Cadorna marched on Rome. September 20th, 1870, 5:15 in the morning. The Italian artillery opened fire on the walls of Rome, specifically on the section near the Porta Pia. Papal Zouaves, volunteers from France, Belgium, Canada, Ireland, who had come to defend the Pope, fired back from behind the walls. This lasted 3 hours. At 9:40 in the morning, a breach opened in the wall, the Breccia di Porta Pia. Through it, the Italian army entered Rome. 49 Italian soldiers died, 19 papal defenders. In 6 hours, a millennium. Pius IX gave the order. White flag, the papal state, which had existed for 1100 years, since 756 AD, capitulated. In a single morning, the citizens greeted the army in different ways. Liberals and nationalists shouted with joy. The clergy and monarchists looked on in silent horror. The majority simply observed. This was Rome. They knew how to wait. Rome became the capital of a united Italy. 3 months later, January 26, 1871. Pius IX declared himself a prisoner of the Vatican. He locked himself inside and did not leave for the rest of his life. 9 years, never crossing the border of a papal state shrunk to 44 hectares. He demanded that Catholics throughout the world boycott the Italian state. He forbade participation in elections. Non expedite, it is not fitting. And around the Vatican, the new Italy was building its capital, cutting boulevards through the sites of monasteries, installing ministries where cardinals' villas had stood, erecting the monument to Victor Emmanuel II, enormous, white, blazingly out of place, right at the foot of the Capitoline Hill. The Romans nicknamed it the typewriter, or the wedding cake. Too new, too white, too self-satisfied. Two Romes, one noisy, new, drunk on freedom and confusion, the other in 44 hectares of silence. Both real, both irreconcilable, and both part of one city. Because Rome is never simple, it is always several truths at once. The 20th century was waiting around the corner, and it would bring what Rome had not yet seen. Not barbarians, not plague, not the Inquisition. It would bring planes with bombs, and a man with a raised arm who would promise the city a new empire, and bring it new ruins. First half of the 20th century. After the First World War, Italy had won, and felt like the loser. 300,000 dead, debts, inflation, unemployment. Veterans came home to empty pockets and mockery. They had fought, they had survived, and now they stood in bread lines. The country was boiling. Benito Mussolini, former teacher, former socialist, former journalist, a man without principles, but with a perfect instinct for the crowd. He understood what other politicians did not. People don't need a program. People need a dream. People need an enemy. People need a leader who says not, "We will try, but we will win." October 28, 1922. The blackshirts were marching on Rome. The army could have stopped them. King Victor Emmanuel III had actually signed the order for martial law. Then he revoked it. He was afraid of civil war. He was afraid of Mussolini himself. He was afraid of making a mistake. Fear is a poor counselor. Mussolini did not march on Rome. He sat in Milan and waited for the result. When it became clear, he came by train in a sleeping car, first class. That is how myths are born, from convenient lies and other people's fear. The king appointed him prime minister. Rome had a new master, Duce, leader. Mussolini understood something else. In Rome, in the city where every stone shouts of greatness, power must be spectacle, public, theatrical, monumental. He wanted to restore imperial greatness to Rome, not metaphorically, literally. And the first thing he did was tear Rome down. The medieval quarters between the forums, alive, crowded, smelling of life, were demolished by bulldozers, pickaxes, and orders. Thousands of people evicted. Houses that were 800 years old, destroyed. Churches torn down. Alleys erased. In their place, a wide avenue was cut through. Via dei Fori Imperiali, the street of the imperial forums. A straight road for parades, so that the columns could march from his balcony to the Colosseum. Beneath this road, the forums of Trajan, Nerva, Caesar, not fully excavated, not fully studied, simply paved over, buried under propaganda. Historians have never forgiven this. Mussolini wanted to be the new Caesar. He was the new Cola di Rienzo, a man who had read too many books about antiquity. and decided that history was a costume you could put on. It is not a costume, it is a sentence. In 1938, Hitler came to Rome. Mussolini showed him the city, led him through the forums, organized parades. He wanted to make an impression. An impression was made. A year later, a pact. 2 years later, war. "I need a few thousand dead to sit at the table of the victors," Mussolini told his allies when declaring war in 1940. He would get them, only not in the form of victory. By 1943, the illusion had dissolved. Empty stores. Allied bombers were already working over northern Italy. Mussolini was losing the war as swiftly as he had once won elections. On July 25, 1943, his own Grand Council of Fascism voted against him. The king arrested him that same night. Rome heard it on the radio. People came out into the streets. They embraced strangers. Some wept. Some tore fascist insignia off the walls with their bare hands until they bled. 20 years of fear, and just like that. But the joy did not last long. July 19, 1943. The Allies bombed Rome. Rome had been declared an open city, undefended, demilitarized. Under the laws of war, that should have saved it. It did not. A workers' neighborhood, a rail junction, a military target. But the bombs fell imprecisely. Residential areas, hospitals, churches. 1,500 dead in one day. The next day, Pope Pius XII went to San Lorenzo in person. He walked through the ruins in his white vestments, which became covered in dust and blood. He gave money from his own pocket. It was the last war in which the Pope had no power, but had a presence. Sometimes that matters more than power. After Italy's capitulation, the Germans occupied Rome in a matter of hours. One day, and the city had a new master, again, as in 410, as in 546, as in 1527. Only now the masters came in tanks and spoke German. October 16, 1943, Saturday, Shabbat. At dawn, German forces and Italian fascists surrounded the Jewish quarter. In 16 hours, 1,022 people were seized. Of them, 270 children. They were sent to Auschwitz. 16 people came back. 16. Next to this ghetto stands the Theater of Marcellus, built in 13 BC. At the same time, the first Jews were settling in these quarters. They were neighbors for 22 centuries, until one morning the trucks came. The partisans were active. On March 23, 1944, at Via Rasella, they bombed a column of German police. 33 soldiers killed. Hitler gave the order, 10 Italians for every German soldier. The Ardeatine Caves. 335 people were executed in one day, not soldiers, not mostly partisans. People grabbed in the streets, pulled from prisons, taken at random, professors, workers, priests, Jews, communists, ordinary passers-by, they were shot. The caves were blown up with explosives, sealed with earth. Today there is a memorial there, a quiet place, cold. It smells of stone and old bitterness. The names are not forgotten. Names must never be forgotten. June 4, 1944. Dawn. American troops entered Rome, the first European city liberated by the Allies. 2 days later, Normandy. 1 year later, the end of the war. Mussolini died the way all those die who promise their people greatness and bring them ruins. Upside down, on the same square where a year earlier his black shirts had shot partisans. History knows how to choose its location. Rome survived, again, as always. Second half of the 20th century. the present
It's
day.
amazing how they live right here among
The
the
post-war
ruins.
miracle, Il Miracolo Economico. Italy rose from the ashes so quickly it couldn't believe itself. In 10 years, from poverty to prosperity, from ration books to consumer boom, Fiat cars in the streets, Vespas buzzing between trams, refrigerators, washing machines, the first vacations at the seaside. Hollywood came to Rome. Cinecittà, the enormous studios on the outskirts that Mussolini had built for propaganda, had become a factory of world cinema. Ben-Hur, Cleopatra, dozens of other films were shot here. Stars lived on Via Veneto, drank Campari in open-air cafes. The paparazzi, the very word born in Rome, from a Fellini novel, hunted them with cameras. La Dolce Vita, the sweet life. Federico Fellini shot it in 1960, and he hit the target so precisely that the film's title became the name of an entire era. Rome hosted the Olympic Games in 1960. The marathon was run at night, along the Appian Way by torchlight, the finish at the Arch of Constantine. Abebe Bikila of Ethiopia ran barefoot and won, under an arch built in honor of an emperor who ruled 1,600 years before him. Rome knows how to create such moments, when history arranges itself into a frame, and you can't believe it wasn't invented. Then came the 70s. Gli anni di piombo, the years of lead. The Red Brigades believed that Italian democracy was a facade, that fascism hid behind it, that weapons were the only language of change. They killed judges, police, journalists, industrialists. Aldo Moro, one of the most significant politicians of post-war Italy. On the morning of March 16, 1978, his car was on its way to Parliament for a vote that was to change Italian politics forever. In a matter of seconds, 5 bodyguards were killed. Moro was kidnapped. 55 days. For 55 days, he wrote letters to his wife, his children, politicians, Pope Paul VI, from the Red Brigade's prison. He asked for negotiations. He asked for an exchange. The Italian state refused. One cannot negotiate with terrorists. May 9, 1978. In the trunk of a red Renault 4 on Via Catani, the body of Aldo Moro was found. Murdered. 10 bullets. Rome stopped. Not physically. Inside. That day is called the end of Italian political optimism. Before it, people believed that a deal could be reached. After, no longer so certain. The state won, but the wound remained. Some wounds remained forever. They simply stopped bleeding. Rome, at the end of the 20th century, had become itself again. Complex, noisy, overcrowded, unbearable, and beautiful at once. 3 million citizens, plus 15 million tourists a year. We have returned to where we began. Beneath every step in this city, 20 layers of history. Empires here, popes here, revolutions here, blood and marble, plague and Baroque, gladiators and movie stars, here, all of it simultaneously. Rome has always been a city to which strangers came. Latins, Sabines, Etruscans, Greeks, Gauls, Jews, Arabs, Normans, Spaniards, French, Germans. They came as conquerors and stayed as Romans. That was always so. It is so now. Rome belongs to no one and belongs to everyone who lives in it. That is its secret. Caesar died. Augustus died. Popes lost their power one by one. Mussolini hung upside down. Everyone who thought Rome belonged to them was wrong. Rome will outlive everyone. It has already outlived everyone. And when the last tourist leaves, and the last motor scooter falls silent, and the last barista switches off the coffee machine, the Tiber will still flow. as it has flowed for 2,800 years, past the forums, past the churches, past the palaces and slums, past the ruins and the gardens, past everything that was and everything that will be. Because the city is not stone, stone crumbles. The city is the will of people to return to their hearths the morning after catastrophe, to light the fire again, to build again, to live, even when there is no rational reason to do so, the eternal city. Not because it is made of eternal material, but because in it live people who refuse to die. This is Rome. Dum Romae consulitur, saguntum expugnatur. While Rome deliberates, Saguntum falls. Livy, 1st century BC. Rome is still deliberating. Rome is still standing. If this story has gripped you, click subscribe. Every week we bring cities, empires, and eras back to life, the ones history has made into legend.